Imagine waking up tomorrow and not knowing what comes next. No clear plan, no certainty, no answers. Your brain reacts to uncertainty the same way it reacts to danger. Your heart beats faster, your thoughts race, and fear quietly takes control. But why does the human brain hate the unknown so much? And how does this hidden fear shape our decisions, relationships, and entire lives without us realizing it? This is the psychology of the fear of the unknown. Chapter 1: The invisible fear shaping human life. Fear does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it doesn't scream or panic or cause us to run. Sometimes, fear is quiet, invisible, hidden behind hesitation, delay, and endless thinking. One of the most powerful fears shaping human life today is not the fear of danger itself, but the fear of what we don't know, the fear of the unknown. This fear doesn't always feel dramatic. It often appears in ordinary moments, waiting for an important message, standing at a life-changing decision, or lying awake at night thinking about a future that feels unclear. You may not feel terrified, but your mind feels uneasy, restless, uncomfortable. That discomfort is not random. From a psychological perspective, the fear of the unknown is one of the most fundamental fears the human brain experiences. It sits underneath many other fears: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of change. Because at the core of all these fears, there is uncertainty. Think about it. When someone waits for medical test results, the fear isn't just about illness, it's about not knowing. When a relationship feels distant or silent, the fear isn't just loneliness. It's uncertainty about where things are going. When people stay in jobs they hate or situations that harm them, the fear isn't the present moment. It's the unknown future that feels more threatening than the familiar pain. This tells us something important. The human brain often prefers known discomfort over unknown possibility. But why? Why does uncertainty feel so threatening, even when nothing bad has actually happened? Why does the mind react to not knowing as if something dangerous is approaching? To understand this, we first need to understand one key truth about the human brain. The brain is not designed for happiness. It is designed for survival, and survival depends heavily on prediction. For most of human history, uncertainty was dangerous. Not knowing what was hiding in the dark, not knowing whether food would be available tomorrow, not knowing if another tribe was friendly or hostile, uncertainty often meant death. So, the brain evolved to treat the unknown as a warning signal. Even today, thousands of years later, that same ancient system is still active inside us. But here's the problem: we no longer live in a world where uncertainty means physical danger. Yet the brain still reacts as if it does. This creates a mismatch between the modern world and the ancient brain. Your brain cannot easily tell the difference between a lion hiding in the bushes and an unclear future. Both feel like threats. This is why uncertainty creates tension in the body, why your thoughts start racing, why your mind imagines worst-case scenarios. Psychologists call this anticipatory fear. Fear triggered not by what is happening now, but by what might happen. And the brain is very good at imagining what might go wrong. In fact, when information is missing, the brain doesn't stay neutral. It fills the gaps, often with negative possibilities. This is not pessimism. This is biology. The human brain evolved to ask one dominant question: what's the worst that could happen? Because in survival terms, preparing for danger was safer than assuming safety. But in modern life, this survival strategy often becomes a psychological burden. It leads to overthinking, avoidance, decision paralysis, chronic anxiety about the future, all rooted in one simple discomfort: not knowing. Research in psychology shows that uncertainty activates the same brain regions associated with fear and pain. In other words, the brain doesn't treat uncertainty as neutral information, it treats it as a potential threat. This is why people often say things like, "I just want to know what's going to happen. I can handle bad news, I just can't handle waiting. I hate not knowing where I stand." These are not personality flaws. They are reflections of how the human brain is wired. Even children show this response early in life. When outcomes are unpredictable, stress increases. When rules are unclear, anxiety rises. The brain craves structure, patterns, predictability, because predictability gives the brain a sense of control, and control reduces fear. This is why routines feel comforting, why plans reduce anxiety, why clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, feels safer than uncertainty. But the fear of the unknown doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes societies, it influences markets, politics, cultural behavior. Humans create systems, beliefs, and narratives largely to reduce uncertainty. From calendars and clocks to laws and traditions to science itself, much of human progress is driven by a desire to understand and predict the world. Yet uncertainty can never be fully eliminated, and this creates a constant tension inside the human mind. A tension between the brain's need for certainty and the reality of an unpredictable world. This tension is where fear grows. And in the chapters ahead, we will explore exactly how this fear operates inside the brain, inside decision-making, inside relationships, and inside modern life. We will look at the neuroscience behind uncertainty, the psychology experiments that reveal how deeply it affects behavior, and the subtle ways it controls choices without us realizing it. But first, we must understand the foundation. The fear of the unknown is not weakness, it is not failure. It is a deeply human response, written into the structure of the brain itself, and once we understand where it comes from, we can begin to understand how to live with it, instead of being controlled by it. To understand why the brain reacts this way, we must go back, not to modern psychology, but to human evolution itself. Because the fear of the unknown was once a matter of life and death. Chapter 2: The Survival Brain and the Need for Predictability. To understand why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable, we need to step far back in time. Not a few decades, not even a few centuries. We need to return to the world where the human brain was formed, a world without modern cities, without electricity, without safety nets. For early humans, life was unpredictable and unpredictability was dangerous. Every day carried unanswered questions. Would there be food today? Would predators appear at night? Would the weather turn hostile? Would another group attack? In this environment, survival depended on one critical ability, the ability to predict what comes next. The brain that could detect patterns, anticipate danger, and prepare for the unknown was more likely to survive. And the brain that failed to do this often did not. This is where our relationship with uncertainty begins. The human brain evolved not as a thinking machine, but as a prediction engine. Its primary job was never happiness or fulfillment. Its job was to reduce uncertainty in order to stay alive. To the survival brain, uncertainty was not curiosity, it was risk. Imagine walking through tall grass tens of thousands of years ago. If the grass moved, your brain had options: assume it was nothing or assume it was a predator. The brain that assumed danger even when wrong had a better chance of survival. This created what psychologists now call a negativity bias. The brain became wired to prioritize potential threats over neutral possibilities. This bias still exists today, and it explains why uncertainty automatically feels unsafe. Because in evolutionary terms, not knowing often meant not surviving. Over time, the brain developed systems specifically designed to manage uncertainty. One of the most important was pattern recognition. Humans became experts at finding meaning in the environment. Animal tracks, weather changes, social behaviors, repeated outcomes. Patterns gave the brain something it deeply craved: predictability. Predictability allowed the brain to relax just a little. When the environment felt predictable, the nervous system calmed down. When the environment felt unpredictable, the brain entered a state of alert. This is why even today, sudden changes feel uncomfortable. Unexpected silence, unclear outcomes, broken routines. These situations activate the same ancient alert system. But here's where modern life creates a problem. The world we live in today is very different from the one our brains evolved in. Most of the threats we face now are not physical. They are psychological, social uncertainty, financial uncertainty, emotional uncertainty, future uncertainty. Yet the brain reacts to these modern uncertainties using the same ancient tools. This creates a constant state of internal tension. Your survival brain does not understand job interviews, emails, or long-term life planning. It only understands one thing: is this situation predictable or not? When the answer is no, the alarm system activates. This is why uncertainty often leads to restlessness, irritability, hypervigilance, difficulty relaxing. The brain is scanning for threats that may never arrive. Another key part of this survival system is the need for control. Control gives the brain the illusion of predictability. Even small actions, checking your phone, refreshing messages, rereading information, can temporarily reduce uncertainty. These behaviors are not habits, they are coping mechanisms. The brain is trying to restore a sense of safety. In psychology, this is known as uncertainty reduction behavior. Humans are naturally driven to reduce uncertainty, even if the methods are irrational. For example, people check the same information repeatedly, even when it won't change. They overplan for situations that cannot be fully controlled. They stay in familiar environments, even when unhappy. From an evolutionary perspective, familiarity equals safety. Even when familiar conditions are painful, the brain understands them. The unknown, however, has no reference point, and what the brain cannot predict, it cannot control. This is why change feels threatening. Change introduces variables. Variables introduce uncertainty. Uncertainty triggers fear. In ancient times, fear prepared the body for action. Heart rate increased, attention sharpened, energy was mobilized. But in modern life, there is often no physical action to take. You can't run from an unclear future, so the energy stays trapped in the nervous system. This creates chronic stress. Researchers have found that unpredictable environments produce higher stress responses than predictable ones, even when the actual danger level is low. The brain cares less about how bad a situation is, and more about how uncertain it feels. This explains a powerful and uncomfortable truth. The brain often prefers predictable pain over unpredictable relief. This is why people delay difficult decisions, why they stay in unhealthy routines, why they avoid uncertainty even when growth is possible. The survival brain is not concerned with your potential. It is concerned with your safety, and safety, to the brain, means predictability. Understanding this changes how we see fear. Fear of the unknown is not weakness. It is a leftover survival mechanism. A mechanism that once saved lives. But in today's world, this mechanism often works against us. And to truly understand how this fear takes control, we need to look inside the brain itself, at the specific systems that activate when uncertainty appears. In the next chapter, we will explore what actually happens inside the brain when uncertainty strikes, which regions activate, which chemicals are released, and why the mind reacts before logic has a chance to respond. Chapter 3. What happens in the brain during uncertainty? When uncertainty enters your life, the reaction begins long before you are consciously aware of it. You may believe you are thinking about the situation, but in reality, your brain has already responded. This response is automatic, fast, and deeply rooted in biology. To understand this process, we need to look inside the brain, not at thoughts or emotions first, but at the systems designed to detect danger. At the center of this response is a small, almond-shaped structure known as the amygdala. The amygdala is often called the brain's alarm system. Its role is simple but powerful: to scan for threats and react before conscious thinking has time to intervene. When you encounter something uncertain, an unclear outcome, an unpredictable situation, an unanswered question, the amygdala activates. Importantly, the amygdala does not wait for proof. It does not ask, "Is this situation actually dangerous?" It asks a different question: Could this be dangerous? And if the answer is even possibly yes, the alarm is triggered. This is why uncertainty feels emotional before it feels logical. Before your rational mind can analyze the situation, your nervous system is already responding. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, attention narrows. The body prepares for action. This process is part of the fight-or-flight response, a system that evolved to protect us from immediate physical threats. But here's the critical detail. The amygdala cannot distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological unknown. To your brain, an unclear future and a visible danger can feel surprisingly similar. As the amygdala activates, it sends signals throughout the brain. One of its key targets is the hypothalamus, which triggers the release of stress hormones. Two of the most important are adrenaline, which prepares the body for quick action, cortisol, which keeps the body alert and focused. In short bursts, these chemicals are helpful. They increase awareness, sharpen focus, improve reaction time. But when uncertainty is ongoing, when there is no clear resolution, these chemicals remain active. This is where problems begin. Chronic uncertainty leads to prolonged stress activation, and prolonged stress changes how the brain functions. One of the first areas affected is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking, planning, decision-making, emotional regulation. It is the part of the brain that says, "Let's think this through." But under stress, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active. Why? Because from an evolutionary perspective, deep thinking was not useful in immediate danger. If a predator was approaching, there was no time for careful reasoning. So the brain shifts control away from logic and toward survival instincts. This is why uncertainty often leads to overreactions, emotional decisions, difficulty thinking clearly. You are not losing control. Your brain is temporarily prioritizing survival over reasoning. At the same time, another powerful system becomes active, the imagination. When information is missing, the brain tries to fill in the gaps. This is not creativity, it is threat prediction. The brain asks, "What could go wrong?" And then it begins to simulate possibilities. Unfortunately, the brain does not simulate neutral outcomes very well. It is biased toward negative scenarios. This is known as catastrophic thinking. Not because the mind wants to suffer, but because preparing for danger was once protective. If you imagine the worst and prepared for it, you are more likely to survive. So, when the future is unclear, the brain often defaults to worst-case scenarios. This explains why people say things like, "My mind keeps going to the worst outcome. I can't stop thinking about what might happen. I know I'm overthinking, but I can't stop." This is not a failure of willpower. It is the natural behavior of a brain under uncertainty. Another important area involved is the anterior cingulate cortex. This region plays a role in detecting conflict and ambiguity. When outcomes are unclear, this area becomes highly active. It signals that something is unresolved. This unresolved state creates mental discomfort. The brain wants closure. Psychologists call this the need for cognitive closure. When closure is missing, the brain remains alert. This is why unanswered questions feel heavier than answered ones, even when the answer is unpleasant. Knowing allows the brain to move on. Not knowing keeps the system activated. Over time, this constant activation becomes exhausting. Mental energy is drained. Focus decreases. Emotional resilience weakens. This is why people under prolonged uncertainty often report fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating, emotional numbness. The brain is working overtime. But perhaps the most important thing to understand is this: the brain reacts to uncertainty as if something is already wrong even when nothing is. This is why fear of the unknown can feel so real. The body reacts first, the mind tries to catch up later. Understanding this process helps remove self-blame. You are not weak for feeling uneasy about uncertainty. You are experiencing a deeply ingrained biological response, but if this response remains unexamined, it can quietly shape behavior. It can influence decisions, avoidance, relationships, and sometimes It leads people to choose certainty even when that certainty is harmful. Which raises an important question: why does the brain sometimes prefer bad news over no news at all? In the next chapter, we will explore a surprising psychological truth: why the human brain often chooses negative certainty over hopeful uncertainty. Chapter 4: Why the brain prefers bad news over no news. At first, this idea may sound strange. Why would anyone prefer bad news over the possibility of good news? Why would the human brain choose certainty, even painful certainty, instead of waiting for an outcome that could be better? Yet psychology shows this pattern again and again. When given the choice between knowing something negative right now or waiting without knowing, many people choose the bad news, not because they enjoy it, but because the brain finds uncertainty more stressful than pain. To understand why, we need to look at how the brain processes information. The brain is constantly trying to create a clear map of reality. It wants to know what is happening, what will happen next, what should I prepare for. When information is missing, that map remains incomplete, and an incomplete map creates anxiety. Psychologists call this state ambiguity distress. The brain experiences uncertainty as a form of unresolved threat. There is no clear enemy, no clear solution, and no clear timeline. This keeps the nervous system activated. Bad news, however, provides something powerful: closure. Even when the information is unpleasant, it allows the brain to update its internal model of the world. Once the brain knows what it is dealing with, it can begin to adapt. This is why people often say, "At least now I know. I can deal with this. It's not good, but it's clear." From a brain perspective, clarity equals control. Control does not mean happiness, it means predictability. And predictability reduces fear. Research supports this idea. In psychological studies, participants exposed to uncertain outcomes show higher stress responses than those exposed to predictable negative outcomes. Heart rate increases more. Cortisol levels remain elevated longer. Emotional discomfort lasts. The brain reacts more strongly to not knowing than to knowing something bad. This explains many puzzling human behaviors: why people stay in relationships that hurt them, why employees remain in jobs they dislike, why individuals avoid medical checkups but feel relief once they receive a diagnosis. The pain was already there, but the uncertainty made it heavier. Once the outcome is known, the mind can begin to adjust. Another important factor is anticipation. Anticipation is mentally expensive. When you are waiting for an outcome, your brain keeps revisiting the situation, replaying possibilities, running simulations. This constant mental activity drains energy. In contrast, once something is known, even if negative, the brain stops imagining endless futures. It shifts from anticipation to adaptation. This shift reduces mental strain. This is why prolonged waiting often feels worse than the outcome itself. The brain struggles with open-ended timelines. It prefers beginnings, middles, and ends. This is also connected to something psychologists call intolerance of uncertainty. Some individuals have a lower tolerance for not knowing. For them, uncertainty feels deeply threatening. Their nervous system stays in a heightened state longer. This doesn't mean they are weak. It means their brain is especially sensitive to ambiguity. In these individuals, the desire for certainty becomes stronger, and sometimes, this leads to decisions made not because they are good, but because they reduce uncertainty. This is where fear of the unknown quietly controls behavior. The brain may choose a familiar situation over a better, but uncertain one, a known problem over an unknown opportunity, a clear ending over an open possibility, even when the outcome limits growth. From the brain's perspective, this choice makes sense. Uncertainty equals risk. Certainty, even painful certainty, equals safety. There is also a social component to this process. Humans are deeply social beings. Social uncertainty, not knowing how others feel, where you stand, or what someone intends, can be especially distressing. Silence often feels worse than rejection. Ambiguity feels heavier than clarity. This is why people sometimes seek answers even when they fear the response. The brain is not asking for comfort, it is asking for resolution. This preference for certainty also explains why humans are drawn to explanations, even incomplete or incorrect ones. A flawed explanation feels safer than no explanation at all, because it gives the brain something to hold on to. But there is a cost to this tendency. When people choose certainty too quickly, they may accept limiting beliefs, rigid routines, or unhealthy situations. They trade possibility for predictability. And over time, this shapes the direction of their lives. Understanding this mechanism is not about judging behavior, it is about recognizing how deeply uncertainty affects the brain. The brain is not making these choices consciously, it is reacting to discomfort. Fear of the unknown pushes people toward what feels stable even when it is not healthy. And this influence becomes especially visible when we look at everyday decisions. Small choices, delayed actions, avoided risks. Which leads us to the next chapter. In the next chapter, we will explore how fear of the unknown shapes daily decision-making, and why uncertainty quietly holds people back from change. Chapter 5: Fear of the unknown in daily decision-making. Most of the time, fear of the unknown does not announce itself clearly. It doesn't say, "I am afraid." Instead, it disguises itself as hesitation, delay, doubt, second-guessing. It shows up in everyday decisions, often so subtly that people believe they are being logical, cautious, or realistic. But beneath many of these choices lies one powerful force: uncertainty avoidance. Every day, the human brain makes thousands of decisions. Some are small, some are life-changing. And in many of them, the brain is quietly asking the same question: what feels safest right now? Not what is best in the long term, not what leads to growth, but what reduces uncertainty in the present moment. This is why fear of the unknown has such a strong influence on behavior. Consider career decisions. Many people stay in jobs they dislike for years, not because they believe the job is fulfilling, but because it is familiar. They understand the routine, they know what is expected, they can predict the outcomes. Leaving introduces uncertainty, a new environment, unknown expectations, unclear success or failure. To the brain, this feels risky. Even if the current situation is stressful, it is predictable stress. And predictable stress often feels safer than uncertain possibility. The same pattern appears in relationships. People sometimes remain in emotionally distant or unhealthy relationships, not because they are happy, but because they know what the relationship looks like. Ending it introduces questions. What comes next? Will I be alone? Will I regret it? The unknown future feels more threatening than the known discomfort, so the brain chooses familiarity. This choice is not irrational, it is protective. The brain is minimizing uncertainty. Fear of the unknown also plays a major role in decision paralysis. This occurs when people delay decisions for long periods, not because they lack information, but because every option carries uncertainty. Choosing one path means closing others, and closing possibilities feels risky. So the brain stays in a holding pattern. Psychologists describe this as avoidance through inaction. By not choosing, the brain temporarily avoids the fear associated with uncertainty, but this relief is short-lived, because uncertainty remains unresolved. Over time, inaction creates its own stress. Another area heavily influenced by uncertainty is risk-taking. Many people believe they are risk-averse by nature, but in reality, people are often uncertainty-averse. They may accept known risks while avoiding unknown ones. For example, investing in familiar assets rather than new opportunities, choosing traditional paths over unconventional ones, repeating behaviors that no longer serve them. The brain prefers what it can predict. Even if the predicted outcome is average, this tendency shapes entire life trajectories. Fear of the unknown also affects everyday choices in subtle ways. People delay sending messages because they fear the response. They avoid difficult conversations because they cannot predict the outcome. They postpone starting projects because success or failure is unclear. Each delay feels small, but collectively, these delays add up. They shape habits, limit experiences, and reinforce avoidance patterns. From a psychological standpoint, this behavior is reinforced by short-term relief. When a person avoids an uncertain situation, anxiety decreases momentarily. The brain interprets this reduction in discomfort as success. It learns, avoidance works, this strengthens the habit. Over time, avoidance becomes automatic, and uncertainty becomes increasingly threatening. This cycle is one of the reasons fear of the unknown can quietly grow stronger over time. The less uncertainty you face, the more sensitive the brain becomes to it. Another important factor is loss aversion. Research shows that humans feel losses more strongly than gains. The fear of losing something known often outweighs the potential benefit of something new. This makes uncertain decisions feel emotionally heavier. Even when the potential upside is significant, the brain focuses on what might be lost, not what could be gained. This bias is deeply tied to survival. Protecting existing resources was more important than seeking new ones. But in modern life, this bias can limit growth. It encourages safe choices over meaningful ones. Fear of the unknown also influences how people interpret information. When uncertain, people often seek confirmation rather than exploration. They look for reasons not to change. They focus on potential problems rather than possibilities. This is not pessimism. It is the brain trying to protect itself from unpredictability. Understanding this helps explain why motivation alone is often not enough. People may want change. They may understand logically what is best. But fear of the unknown operates at a deeper level than logic. It is emotional, biological, automatic, and unless this fear is recognized, it continues to guide decisions quietly. Not through panic, but through hesitation. Not through fear itself, but through avoidance of uncertainty. This brings us to an important connection. When fear of the unknown becomes constant, it doesn't just affect decisions. It affects mental health, and one of its strongest expressions is anxiety. In the next chapter, we will explore how uncertainty fuels anxiety and overthinking and why the brain struggles to let go when answers are missing. Chapter 6: Uncertainty, Anxiety, and Overthinking. Anxiety rarely begins with fear itself. More often, it begins with a question. A question without an answer. What if something goes wrong? What if I make the wrong choice? What if the future doesn't turn out the way I hope? At the center of many anxiety experiences lies uncertainty. The human brain is uncomfortable with open-ended situations. When answers are missing, the mind does not rest, it searches. And when it cannot find certainty, it creates possibilities. This is where overthinking begins. Overthinking is not a sign of intelligence or weakness. It is the brain's attempt to regain control. From a psychological perspective, anxiety can be understood as a prolonged fear response, not to a present threat, but to a future possibility. The brain remains in a state of anticipation, waiting for something to happen, but nothing happens. And this waiting becomes exhausting. One of the key features of anxiety is hypervigilance. The brain stays alert, scanning for signs of danger, even when the environment is safe. This happens because uncertainty keeps the alarm system partially activated. The amygdala does not fully stand down. It remains ready, and as long as it remains active, the body stays tense. Muscles do not fully relax. Breathing becomes shallow. Sleep is disrupted. The brain is preparing for something that may never come. Overthinking is closely linked to this process. When the brain cannot predict outcomes, it attempts to think its way to certainty. It replays scenarios, analyzes past decisions, imagines future conversations. This mental activity feels productive. But it rarely leads to resolution, because the problem is not a lack of thinking, it is a lack of certainty. Psychologists describe this pattern as rumination. Rumination keeps attention focused on uncertainty. It creates the illusion of control, but often increases anxiety instead. Another important factor is reassurance seeking. People experiencing uncertainty often seek reassurance from others. They ask for opinions. They look for validation. They search for answers. Reassurance can temporarily reduce anxiety, but the relief does not last because the underlying uncertainty remains. The brain learns that reassurance provides short-term comfort, so it asks for more. This creates a cycle. Uncertainty leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to reassurance seeking. Reassurance reduces anxiety briefly. Uncertainty returns. This cycle can quietly dominate daily life. Small uncertainties become emotionally heavy. Minor decisions feel overwhelming. The mind becomes sensitive to ambiguity. Another key component is intolerance of uncertainty. Some brains are more sensitive to uncertainty than others. This sensitivity is influenced by genetics, early experiences, and learning. People with high intolerance of uncertainty experience stronger emotional reactions when outcomes are unclear. They may feel a strong need to resolve uncertainty quickly, difficulty relaxing when answers are missing, increased worrying about future events. This does not mean they are less capable. It means their nervous system reacts more strongly to ambiguity. Modern life often amplifies this sensitivity. Constant information, endless choices, unclear futures. The brain rarely gets closure. Notifications arrive without resolution. News cycles change rapidly. Social feedback is unpredictable. This constant exposure to uncertainty keeps the nervous system activated. Over time, the brain begins to expect uncertainty everywhere. It becomes alert by default. This is when anxiety becomes chronic. The mind starts to anticipate fear itself, not because something bad is happening, but because uncertainty feels intolerable. It is important to understand that anxiety is not a flaw. It is the brain trying to protect the individual from unknown danger. But when uncertainty is constant, the protection system never turns off. This is why people with anxiety often say, "I know nothing bad is happening, but I can't relax. My mind won't stop. I feel tense for no reason." The reason is not hidden. It is unresolved uncertainty. Understanding this shifts how we view anxiety. Instead of seeing it as a rational fear, we can see it as a brain struggling with not knowing. And this understanding opens the door to change, not by eliminating uncertainty, which is impossible, but by learning to tolerate it. But uncertainty does not only affect internal mental states, it also shapes how we interact with others. And some of the strongest uncertainty humans experience is social. In the next chapter, we will explore social uncertainty. Why not knowing how others see us can feel deeply threatening to the human brain. Chapter 7. Social Uncertainty and the Fear of Human Reactions. For most of human history, survival did not depend only on food or shelter. It depended on people. Belonging to a group meant protection. Rejection meant vulnerability. This is why the human brain treats social uncertainty as a serious threat. Not knowing how others feel about us, where we stand, or how we will be judged, activates the same fear systems as physical danger. Social uncertainty is one of the most powerful forms of uncertainty the brain experiences, and often, it is the most emotionally painful. Think about moments of silence, an unanswered message, a delayed response, a vague reaction. Nothing harmful has happened, yet the mind becomes restless. Thoughts begin to spiral. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Have I been rejected? The discomfort does not come from facts, it comes from not knowing. From a neurological perspective, social uncertainty activates the brain's social pain network. This network overlaps with areas involved in physical pain. In other words, the brain processes social ambiguity as a real threat, not metaphorically, biologically. The brain evolved this way because social exclusion once had life or death consequences. Being rejected by the group reduced access to resources and protection. So the brain learned to monitor social signals closely. Tone of voice, facial expressions, changes in behavior. When signals are unclear, the brain fills in the gaps. often with negative interpretations. This is not because people are insecure. It is because the brain is trying to predict social safety. Uncertainty removes predictability, and predictability is what the social brain depends on. This is why fear of judgment is so common. Not knowing how others will react creates emotional tension. Public speaking is a perfect example. The fear is rarely about speaking itself. It is about not knowing how the audience will respond. Will they judge me? Will I make a mistake? Will I be rejected? The uncertainty triggers fear. Even positive attention can feel uncomfortable when it is unpredictable. Another important aspect of social uncertainty is status ambiguity. Humans are sensitive to their position within social groups. Unclear roles, unclear expectations, and unclear feedback create stress. This is why ambiguous workplaces often feel more stressful than demanding ones. People can handle pressure. What they struggle with is uncertainty about expectations and outcomes. Social uncertainty also affects relationships deeply. When communication becomes unclear, anxiety rises. When intentions are ambiguous, trust feels unstable. People often seek clarity even if it leads to conflict because the brain prefers certainty. This is why arguments sometimes feel relieving, not because conflict is pleasant, but because ambiguity has ended. Silence often feels worse than disagreement, because silence leaves the brain guessing. Another key factor is rejection sensitivity. Some individuals are especially sensitive to signs of rejection. Their brains react strongly to social uncertainty. They may interpret neutral signals as negative. This is not intentional. It is the brain attempting to protect against potential exclusion. This sensitivity often develops through past experiences. Early social rejection, inconsistent feedback, unpredictable relationships. The brain learns to stay alert. And over time, social uncertainty becomes emotionally exhausting. This leads to behaviors designed to reduce ambiguity. People may over-explain themselves, seek constant reassurance, avoid social situations, suppress their true opinions, not because they lack confidence, but because they are trying to reduce uncertainty. The brain is prioritizing safety. This also explains why people sometimes change themselves to fit expectations. Fitting in reduces unpredictability. Predictability reduces fear, but there is a cost. Constantly managing uncertainty can limit authenticity. It can shape identity, and over time, it can lead to emotional fatigue. Understanding social uncertainty helps explain why fear of the unknown is not just internal. It exists between people, in relationships, in communities, in societies, and in the modern world. This uncertainty has increased. Digital communication removes many social cues. Messages lack tone, responses are delayed. Feedback is inconsistent. This increases ambiguity. And ambiguity feeds fear, which leads us to the next chapter. Because modern life has amplified uncertainty in ways the human brain was never designed to handle. In the next chapter, we will explore how modern life technology, information overload, and constant change has intensified the fear of the unknown. Chapter 8. How modern life amplifies the fear of the unknown. The human brain evolved in a world that changed slowly. Seasons followed predictable patterns. Social roles were clear. Information was limited and local. Uncertainty existed, but it was not constant. Modern life is different. Today, uncertainty is everywhere, and the human brain is not equipped to handle it at this scale. One of the most powerful amplifiers of uncertainty is information overload. The modern brain is exposed to more information in a single day than previous generations encountered in months. News updates, notifications, endless choices. Information arrives faster than the brain can process it, and much of this information is incomplete, conflicting, or unresolved. This creates a state of continuous ambiguity. The brain struggles to form stable predictions, and without stable predictions, the fear system remains active. Another major factor is the loss of clear timelines. In the past, many life paths were structured: education, work, family. Today, these paths are less predictable. Careers change, relationships evolve, social roles shift. The future feels open but also uncertain. While flexibility offers opportunity, it also removes predictability. And the brain feels this loss deeply. Social media plays a significant role in amplifying uncertainty. Platforms are built on unpredictable feedback. Likes fluctuate, responses are delayed. Validation is inconsistent. This unpredictability activates the brain's reward and fear systems simultaneously. The brain waits for feedback. Not knowing how others will respond keeps attention locked in. This creates emotional tension. Another important aspect is constant comparison. Social media presents curated outcomes. Success without context, happiness without struggle. The brain compares its uncertain future to others' seemingly certain outcomes. This increases anxiety. Not because others are doing better, but because the brain feels left behind in unpredictability. News cycles also contribute to uncertainty. Constant exposure to global events creates a sense of unpredictability. The brain is exposed to threats it cannot control. This activates the fear system without offering solutions. The result is background anxiety, a low-level sense of unease that never fully disappears. Modern work environments often increase uncertainty as well. Remote communication removes clarity. Feedback is delayed. Expectations are unclear. Boundaries are blurred. The brain struggles to predict outcomes. This leads to stress not because work is harder, but because it is less predictable. Technology also accelerates change. Skills become outdated quickly. Industries shift. Future stability feels uncertain. The brain is constantly asked to adapt, but adaptation requires energy. Without periods of predictability, the nervous system becomes fatigued. Another factor is the illusion of control. Modern tools make it seem like everything can be managed. When reality fails to match this expectation, uncertainty feels more threatening. The brain expects clarity and doesn't receive it. This creates frustration and fear. Importantly, the modern world rarely provides closure. Information is ongoing. Stories do not end. Outcomes remain open. The brain never gets the signal that it is safe to rest. This continuous exposure to uncertainty changes behavior. People seek distraction. They avoid decisions. They numb discomfort. Not because they are weak, but because the brain is overwhelmed. The fear of the unknown becomes normalized. It becomes background noise, but its effects are significant. It shapes attention, emotions, decision-making. Understanding this context helps remove self-blame. The problem is not the individual. It is the environment interacting with an ancient brain. And while we cannot eliminate modern uncertainty, we can change how we respond to it. Which leads us to an important question. If uncertainty is unavoidable, can the brain learn to tolerate it? In the next chapter, we will explore how the brain can be trained to tolerate uncertainty, and why learning to sit with the unknown reduces fear over time. Chapter 9. Training the brain to tolerate uncertainty. Uncertainty is unavoidable. No amount of planning, intelligence, or preparation can remove it completely. The future will always contain unknowns. The question is not how to eliminate uncertainty, but how the brain learns to respond to it. Because while the fear of the unknown is natural, it is not fixed. The human brain is adaptable, and this adaptability is one of its greatest strengths. In neuroscience, this ability is known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's capacity to change its structure and function in response to experience. In simple terms, the brain learns from what it repeatedly experiences. This applies not only to skills, but to emotional responses. If the brain repeatedly encounters uncertainty and survives it, its reaction begins to change. But most people unknowingly train their brains in the opposite direction. They avoid uncertainty. And avoidance sends a powerful message to the brain. This situation is dangerous. Each time uncertainty is avoided, the brain becomes more sensitive to it. Fear increases. But when uncertainty is faced gradually and safely, the brain learns a different lesson. This is uncomfortable, but not harmful. This learning process is slow, and it requires patience. One of the most important principles in psychology is exposure. Exposure does not mean forcing yourself into overwhelming situations. It means allowing yourself to experience uncertainty without escaping it immediately. Small doses, manageable steps. For example, sitting with an unanswered message without checking, repeatedly making a decision without seeking excessive reassurance, allowing plans to remain flexible. Each of these experiences teaches the brain something new. That uncertainty does not automatically lead to danger. Over time, the fear response weakens. Another key concept is cognitive reframing. The brain interprets uncertainty as threat by default. Reframing changes that interpretation. Instead of viewing uncertainty as danger, it can be seen as a space for possibility, a sign of growth, a normal part of life. This does not mean pretending uncertainty feels good. It means recognizing that discomfort is not the same as harm. Psychological research shows that how we interpret uncertainty influences our emotional response. When uncertainty is framed as manageable, anxiety decreases. Another powerful tool is tolerance building. Tolerance is not about liking uncertainty. It is about learning to stay present with it. This involves noticing discomfort without reacting to it. The brain learns that it does not need to act immediately. This slows the fear response. Over time, the nervous system becomes more flexible. Mindfulness-based approaches often focus on this skill, not to remove thoughts, but to observe them. Observing uncertainty without trying to solve it immediately reduces emotional intensity. Another important aspect is control awareness. Much anxiety comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. Recognizing the limits of control reduces mental strain. This is not giving up, it is choosing where to focus energy. The brain benefits from distinguishing between what can be influenced, what cannot. Letting go of impossible certainty reduces fear. Another helpful concept is values-based decision-making. Instead of choosing what feels safest, decisions are guided by personal values. This shifts focus from outcome certainty to meaningful action. The brain learns that uncertainty can coexist with purpose. This reduces avoidance. Sleep, physical movement, and routines also play a role. A regulated body supports a regulated brain. When the nervous system is calm, uncertainty feels less threatening. Predictable routines provide a sense of safety, allowing the brain to tolerate unpredictability elsewhere. Importantly, learning to tolerate uncertainty does not mean suppressing fear. Fear may still appear, but it no longer controls behavior. The brain learns that uncertainty is part of life, not a signal to stop living. This training takes time, and progress is not linear. Some days uncertainty feels manageable, other days it feels heavy. This is normal. But over time, the brain becomes less reactive, fear loses its grip, and space opens up for curiosity, flexibility, and growth. This brings us to the final chapter, because once we stop fighting uncertainty, our relationship with it changes. In the final chapter, we will explore what it means to live with the unknown, not as an enemy, but as a constant companion in the human experience. Chapter 10, Living with the Unknown, Not Fighting It. Uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition of being human. From the moment we become aware of ourselves, the future is already unknown. No one truly knows what tomorrow will bring. No one can fully predict how life will unfold. And yet, the human brain spends an enormous amount of energy trying to do exactly that, trying to predict, trying to control, trying to remove uncertainty. This struggle is understandable. The brain was designed to protect us. But when protection becomes obsession, fear quietly takes over. Throughout this documentary, we have seen how fear of the unknown is not a flaw in character. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the echo of an ancient survival system, still active in a modern world. The problem is not that the brain reacts to uncertainty. The problem is that we often believe it shouldn't. We fight discomfort instead of understanding it. We label uncertainty as something to escape, rather than something to learn from. But uncertainty has always been present, even in the most predictable lives, even in the most carefully planned futures. Certainty is not the natural state of life. It is an illusion the brain creates to feel safe. And when that illusion breaks, fear appears. But here is a powerful truth. Fear does not mean danger. Discomfort does not mean failure. Uncertainty does not mean you are lost. It means you are alive in a world that cannot be fully predicted. When the brain learns this distinction, its relationship with uncertainty changes. Instead of reacting automatically, it begins to respond. This is not about eliminating fear. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates behavior. It becomes information, not a command. Living with the unknown requires a shift in perspective. From control to acceptance, from prediction to presence. Presence anchors the brain in what is real, not what might happen. When attention stays in the present moment, the future loses some of its power. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer dominates awareness. This is where many people discover something unexpected. When uncertainty is no longer treated as an enemy, it becomes a space. A space for growth, for change, for possibility. Every meaningful change in human life begins with uncertainty. Learning something new, building relationships, creating art, exploring ideas. None of these come with guarantees. Yet they give life meaning. Certainty provides safety. Uncertainty provides direction. This does not mean seeking chaos. It means allowing life to unfold without constant resistance. Psychological resilience is not built through control. It is built through adaptability. The brain becomes resilient not by avoiding uncertainty, but by learning that it can survive it. Over time, something shifts. Fear response becomes quieter. The nervous system becomes more flexible. The mind becomes less rigid. Uncertainty still exists, but it no longer defines the experience. This is the difference between living in fear of the unknown and living alongside it. Fear narrows attention. Acceptance widens it. Fear says, wait until you know. Acceptance says, move forward anyway, not recklessly, not blindly, but with awareness. There is also a deeper layer to this. The human desire for certainty is often a desire for reassurance, a reassurance that life will be fair, that effort will be rewarded, that pain will make sense. But life does not always offer these guarantees, and this realization can feel unsettling. Yet it can also be freeing, because when certainty is no longer required, failure becomes less threatening. Mistakes become information. The unknown becomes a teacher rather than a threat. This shift does not happen overnight. It happens through repeated experiences of uncertainty, followed by survival. Each time the brain encounters the unknown and nothing catastrophic happens, it learns. And slowly, fear loosens its grip. The goal is not confidence in outcomes. The goal is confidence in the ability to respond. This is where true psychological strength lives. Not in knowing what will happen, but in trusting yourself to adapt. The brain, when allowed to learn this lesson, becomes less reactive, more curious, more open, and this changes how life feels. Decisions become less paralyzing. Change becomes less frightening. The future becomes less overwhelming. Uncertainty does not disappear, but it no longer defines identity. In the end, the fear of the unknown is not something to defeat. It is something to understand, because once you understand it, it no longer controls you. It becomes part of the human experience, not the enemy of it. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: the unknown has always been there, behind every step forward, behind every choice, behind every meaningful moment. Learning to live with it is not just psychological growth, it is what it means to be human. When we stop demanding certainty from life, we finally give ourselves permission to live it. If this documentary helped you understand your own mind a little better, Consider subscribing for more psychology-based explorations of human behavior. You can also share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes understanding begins with reflection.